camped for days all along the northwest, with no knowledge in my chest of ways and means and schemes. By the time I hit Seattle, I arrived by train. It was called the Empire Builder. I don't know how it got its name. Not even old enough to drink, but I always found a way. Often stumbling out onto...
Hello, everybody. How are you? Welcome back. Our next presenter is Vickie Whitehead, and she is the chair of NATOA and director of Indigenous Services at Crowe, MacKay, LLP. Now, she has an MBA and a CPA and is a certified Aboriginal finance manager. And she's going to speak about taxes. And I welcome you, Vickie, and I hope you all enjoy, because there's a lot of good stories about taxes that we need to know.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, everybody. I'd just like to start off by saying my name is Vickie Whitehead. I'm Cree Métis. My family is from Northern Alberta. And we are the Beaudries. My grandfather is August Beaudry, and my grandmother is Maggie Ferguson Ghostkeeper Beaudry. And I just like to share that because I have about 1,000 or so relatives. First off, I'd like to say about taxation. There is no Cree word for taxation. We didn't have tax, we shared. But here we are now. We find ourselves in these colonial times. And one of the ways that we can deal with this is by following their rules. And another way is by changing their rules. So although today I'm going to tell you about taxation and how to follow it, one of the things I want to leave you with is, how do we change it? Because it's not fair, it's not necessarily right, but we do have to follow these rules until we can change it. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about. So I'll share my screen and go through my presentation, and most of it is related to you from Canada Revenue Agency, and you'll find a lot of the information is available on their website. But again, the only way that we can change this is by standing up and making those changes ourselves. So I think this is it here. And you'll hear my cat in the background because he wants to go outside and fight the raccoons, but I'm not letting him. So sorry for all that meowing in the background. So as it said in the overview, taxation on and off reserve, GST remittance and filing taxes. Under Section 87 and 90 of the Indian Act, status Indians do not pay federal or provincial taxes on their personal and real property that is on reserve. So as income is considered personal property, status Indians who work on a reserve do not pay federal or provincial taxes on their employment income. But what does this mean for your business? So I am going to take a focus on business, but there's also, of course, a lot of rules around personal income and employment income. And if you have any questions, for sure, go to that CRA website, but feel free to contact me, connect with me on LinkedIn, or send me an email at vickie@natoa.ca. So who are the taxation authorities in this country we call Canada? Well, that is for First Nations on reserve. Your First Nation actually could have a tax authority. They can have authority to tax property on reserve and to apply municipal taxes if they have drawn those down, either through self-government or actually just by taking down that law. So there's a lot of First Nations now that actually have their members that pay tax to them for the property that you live in on reserve. So some of those self-government agreements contain income tax authority. So for those of you that have filled in personal income taxes, one of the first questions it asks in Canada is, are you a Nisga'a citizen? And the reason for that is Nisga'a has negotiated so that the taxes collected from their citizens, no matter where they live, actually gets paid over to Nisga'a as part of their agreement. So good for them, but you know, for their members, they lost their tax-free status through that agreement. So that's what they decided. That's up to them, right? So off reserve, the tax authorities are municipalities. So I myself live in Coquitlam on Quaquitlam First Nation territory. And the municipality here charges me for property taxes for this house I live in. I also pay annual water, sewer, and school tax to the municipality. So the provinces and territories, they collect income tax, and they also collect provincial or territorial sales tax, or a portion of HST. That's where the province and the feds have got together and decided they're going to charge one harmonized sales tax, and they just split that amongst themselves. Federally, we have our income tax. That's personal income tax, business tax, also GST, goods and services tax, HST, or HST, and also duty. So whenever you pay, you come across the border or you purchase goods that come across the border, you have to pay duty on that. So that's their authorities, and those are all through federal legislation, as I mentioned earlier. So looking at Section 87 of the Indian Act, and what it says is that basically First Nations, an interest of an Indian, so this is a status Indian or a band in reserve lands or surrendered lands, are exempt from taxation, as well as the personal property of an Indian or a band situated on a reserve. And you know what this stems from really is, if you think about when the Indian Act came about, the whole point was to isolate and contain First Nations, and almost to make it so that you didn't want to live on reserve if you look at the Indian Act. So by not allowing you weren't allowed to own anything, like you couldn't own anything, you couldn't vote. There's so many things that you couldn't do. So this was all kind of tied up with that. So this is one that hasn't, one portion of the act that hasn't changed. So what they said then is that it wouldn't be taxable. So you're exempt from paying tax on those things. And there hasn't been really any changes to this except for the First Nations Financial Management Act. And that has more to do with the band and the authorities that they can take down through that act rather than as an individual. So basically what this is saying is if you live on reserve and you have your status card, you shouldn't pay tax. But now there's a lot of rules around that which actually do make you pay tax. So you may think, oh, well, I live on reserve, so it doesn't matter where I work or where I sell my goods as an owner of a business. But yes, actually it does. And there's been a lot of people that have had to pay taxes later because they thought that they were under this act, the Indian Act, and therefore didn't have to pay, or they took advice from someone who unfortunately gave them bad advice. An example of that, I was just talking to Adam about it earlier, was a friend of mine who lived on reserve and worked at a friendship center, and she was told that she didn't have to pay tax on her income, but the friendship center was actually located off reserve. So even though they provided services to other reserves and to status people that lived on reserve, which to me sounds like it wouldn't be taxable, just looking at the rules, it actually is. So they tried to fight it for many, many years, like 20 or some years, and they lost. And so what happened was Canada Revenue Agency came after her, wrote her letters, and said they were going to take her house away from her. She lived off reserve at that point. So not only did they come after the tax that she should have paid, they also charged her interest for all those years. So is that fair? No. but unfortunately she didn't have a leg to stand on. So it makes it very difficult for people, you know, to have to follow these rules, especially when you're given the advice to not to pay. So be careful, my friends. That's my advice to you. So what about Section 90 of the Indian Act? Well, that just says that for the purposes of 87 and 89, personal property that was purchased by Her Majesty the Queen with Indian monies or monies appropriated by Parliament for the use and benefit of Indians or bands, or given to Indians or to a band under a treaty or agreement, shall be deemed always to be on reserve. So I see that, I think there's a bunch of questions in the chat, but I'll come to those in a minute if that's okay. So what about the Métis people, right? What about myself and my Métis brothers and sisters? Well, we just had a court case, which I think it was Harry Daniels took, where he went after Canada, and he said that Métis people should be declared, and non-status should be declared Indians for the purpose of federal parliament lawmaking jurisdiction. So I don't know if you know about all the politics and ins and outs of the Métis and the status, but for Métis, you have to prove that you come from the Red River through your lineage to get Métis card. And then of course for status, you have to prove that you come from the Indian band, and then apply through Indian Affairs. Now with Métis, you can't be Métis and status. And with status, I don't know if they care whether you carry a Métis card or not, but probably not. But for the Métis, if you're Métis, you're Métis. So what this did then is that what we thought with this decision was then that we wouldn't have to pay tax like status Indians, but not true, because CRA says no, that's not true, because under the Indian Act you're not Indians, so you are Métis, and therefore you know, that doesn't change. So you know, I guess more to come on that. Oh, great. I love the Daniels decision. Me too. Not Métis, but I love the Métis. Oh, thanks for all these comments, guys. Agreed, we are back in 1982 under Section 35, but this makes us have a better chance for nation-to-nation relationship with Canada. Excellent comments. Brave little cat, fight the raccoons. Yeah, he thinks he's brave. When he gets to the window, he's all slashy, but when I put him out there, he runs like a little baby. So anyway, I'll keep him in for now. Okay, so what goes into your annual income tax forms? And I'm talking about whether you're a business here, but same is pretty much true for personal tax. But so for a business, you're looking at your business income. So that's all your sales. And if you have any bank interest, so if you have some money sitting in the bank and you earned interest, that goes in there. And then any other income. So if you are running your business plus you're employed and you're a sole proprietor, so just you with your business, that's all combined together in one income tax return. And then what are your expenses for your business? Well, that's the materials that you purchase, whether, you know, if you're making something and then selling it. So your supplies, your computer software, your computer. There's also, if you are off reserve and you pay a mortgage or rent, you can write off a percentage of that. So if you have you have to have a dedicated office that you can set aside, and then you can write off a percentage of your hydro and your taxes, like everything can go into your expenses. So really take a close look at that, or call somebody you know who kind of knows that, to make sure that you get all of those expenses in there, especially if you have to pay tax, because you want to make that tax number as low as possible. So your income that you earned minus your expenses equals your taxable income, right? Okay. So that seems pretty easy. And then your taxable income is multiplied by the tax rate applicable for your province or territory, and that equals the taxes owed. So that's just in general, that's your tax costs. So now let's look at businesses on reserve. So your business income is generally exempt from tax if the actual income earning activities of the business take place on reserve. So that's one of the key factors that we'll find. I'll go through some examples with you. But if your business is operated entirely on a reserve, your business income is connected to a reserve and is exempt under Section 87. So if your business activities are mostly carried on off reserve, your business income is taxable. So CRA talks about these connecting factors, and I'll show you those, but really it's about where you earn your income. So we'll take a look at that. So determining whether your business income is taxable is based on the factors that connect income to a reserve. So you've got to connect it to that Indian Act again. So the courts have indicated that the most significant connecting factor is the location of where your business carries on its revenue generating activities. So where you're selling stuff. So if if they take place on reserve, and location of your customers is also an important factor. So other connecting factors which are less important, I'm going to go through right now. So these are less important factors, but so the first one is whether or not you live on reserve, whether you maintain an office on a reserve or take business orders from a location on a reserve, whether your books and records are kept on a reserve, and whether your administrative, clerical, or accounting activities take place on a reserve. So these are super important if you get audited by CRA, that you kind of have all these connecting factors as well to prove that in fact your income is earned on reserve. So let's go through an example. So Musqueam. Musqueam is Cree for bear. Kimiwan is Cree for rain. So in this example, Musqueam is a registered member of Kimiwan First Nation and lives on Indian Reserve number 1. So he collects cedar bark off reserve and sells cedar clothing at the Friendship Center, which is located off reserve. His records and accounting are done by his cookum, that means grandma, on IR number 2 reserve. So can you tell me, anybody in the chat, is Musqueam's business income taxable? Oops, I keep hitting it with my finger, but I'm not on my iPad. So we have a yes, and we have a no. And I love my cookum. I love my cookum too. Yes, I believe so. No. Right, okay, so, because we talked about all those connecting factors. Is it taxable? He lives on reserve, right? He collects the cedar off reserve. I don't know, does that matter? He sells the cedar at the Friendship Center. Well, the Friendship Center is a First Nation organization, right? And it's located off reserve. His office and records are kept by his cookum on IR number 2, same First Nation. But let's go back to that diagram. So he lives on reserve, orders are taken off reserve. Records on reserve, accounting is done on reserve. According to CRA, Musqueam's income is taxable because his money earning activities and customers are off reserve. And that's the main factor. Where are most of your customers? Where are your orders being taken? So even though all those other factors are on reserve, yes, he has to pay tax. And if he didn't have any money set aside, he could be in big trouble come tax time. So let's look at another example then. Oops. Okay, so what if Musqueam sold his products on and off reserve? So if some of your revenue generating activities take place on a reserve and the rest are off a reserve, the tax exemption under Section 87 of the Indian Act may be prorated. So in that case, part of his income that he earned on reserve is actually not taxable. So hey, that's pretty good, right? So because he has all those other connecting factors, so in that case, his business expenses would be prorated. So that means they take the portion that relates to the on reserve, and he doesn't pay tax on that. So this is, I'll go through an example of that. So Musqueam is a registered member, again, of Kimewan First Nation and lives on IR number 1. His cookum does his books and she lives on IR number 2. In this case, Musqueam is an electrician that works on and off reserve. He keeps track of all his work, and when reviewing at year end, he determined that he worked on reserve 55% of the time. So how much of his expenses would be taxable then? And how much of his income would be taxable? Can anybody answer that one for me? %45. So someone actually wrote here, what if he gets orders online at home on reserve and delivers to the Friendship Center? Yeah, they would still see that as being taxable. So just to go back to that question, because the people are actually off reserve. So many people have tried and lost on this one, and you have to be super careful. Like they try to get their orders for their raw materials sent to reserve, and then they go pick it up, and then they live off reserve, and they try to say their office is on reserve. You know, that can catch up to you. Like as an accountant, I would say, oh yeah, don't do that. But you know, I know people do it. But I would suggest, yeah, be very careful, because like once CRA finds out and audit you and come after you, you really don't have any recourse, and you get stuck, because they have all encompassing power. They can go after your bank account, they can go after anything they want. So in this example, 45%, yes, is taxable. So thank you to Mallory. 45% of his income and 45% of his expenses are taxable. Oh, someone asked here, Leith, are we still using mainstream as an identifier for incomes? What do you mean by that, Leith? If you can share that with us. All right, so we'll hear from Leith about that, and in the meantime, we'll look at Musqueam's business, whether it's taxable or not. So as I mentioned, he lives on reserve. His orders, 55% are on reserve, 45 are off reserve. His records are on reserve, his accounting is on reserve. So it's just that portion, the 45% is taxable, 55% is tax-free. So looking at our formula again, business income minus minus expenses, and those should be in brackets. So you take the product of business income minus expenses, take that result, times that by 45%, that equals your taxable income. And then you apply the tax rate to that, right? So that's not the taxes you pay, that's just the taxable income. So what are some good practices for Musqueam and for you going forward? So make sure you keep copies of all of your sales and your expenses. So including costs of your heating bills, electricity at Cookums, because a percentage of those are expenses that he can include in his tax return. Hold on to all your receipts and sales for a number of years, even if it's just in a file or something like that. For those of you that have notes, so if you have an iPhone, there's this thing called Notes on your iPhone. And I learned this from my husband, who saw it on TikTok, that if you hold down the Notes button, not to go into it, and that happens to me all the time, but hold it down, and it'll come up with a little menu here. And on this menu, one of the options is scan documents. So you can take a picture of a document and hold it in the cloud or hold it somewhere else. Like, I know people don't like keep a file of receipts, like that's so 1980, I get it. I know I'm old, but so use your phone and to keep your records, and then back it up on the cloud or save it to a file somewhere, but keep your records and set money aside each month. So if you're if you've got a business and you're earning money every month, put a little bit aside so that you have enough to pay your taxes at the end of the year. So many people get shocked by how much they actually have to pay and when it's due. And if in doubt, you know, you can call CRA. There's no reason to fear them, and ask for an interpretation, and then document it. Follow up with an email if you can, so that you have it on record. I talked to someone, they said this, and here's the answer I got. You can talk to your bank about setting up like a separate account so you can hold your tax money that you're setting aside in that bank account. And don't take advice from Uncle Mohican that says we shouldn't have to pay taxes. Yeah, I agree, but you know, this is where we are now. So, you know, you have to pay those taxes, and you can't get around it unless you're willing to go through a big court case. And if you are willing to go through a big court case and you think you have something right, reach out to your Indigenous brothers and sisters for help and to make that so that everybody can contribute and support you through that tax court case. So what Lee said, in court decision, they've used commercial mainstream as terminologies for the determination of income as where it is earned. Yes, that is true, and that's what we have to go by. Oh, and Julie said, I am taking a personal income tax course that is also going over business, and I'm learning more about native taxes in this session than in that course. Oh, well, thanks, Julie. I really appreciate that. Feel free again to connect with me on LinkedIn or send me emails if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them. You know, I want you all to be successful. So many Indigenous people set up businesses because we don't fit into mainstream, and I think that's fantastic, and let's support them. My email is Vickie, V-I-C-K-I-E, at NATOA, N-A-T-O-A.ca. And on LinkedIn, I'm Vickie Whitehead. And I guess I can type my email into the chat here. I have my work email as well, which is a bit longer. Great. There you go. There's my two emails in there. Yes, I have my contact information at the end of this presentation, and I'm just going to go through that, and I'll go to the end actually, because we only have like 3 minutes. There's some more information about fishing and farming, but I don't know how many of you are fishermen or farmers, but that's all on the CRA website. If you do start a business, make sure you get your GST number. You need that. You collect, well, you have to pay GST on goods that are delivered to you. You have to pay duty if it comes across the border, as I mentioned. And the difference between the GST you collect from people and the GST you pay is how much you have to remit to the government or how much you get back. So you really have to track your GST. Payroll, if you have staff, of course, is another course altogether, but you do have to manage your payroll properly. Filing your taxes. If you're a sole proprietor, as I mentioned, you file your taxes on your personal income taxes. If you're a corporation, there's corporate filings that you have to do. If it's a partnership, that it depends is the short answer to that. So again, I mentioned that tax rules change based on court cases, and really you should seek advice if you get audited by CRA. So reach out to your lawyer friends, reach out to your accountant friends, of which I'm one, and really, you know, get the advice that you need to make sure that you can respond appropriately, because we have more experience. I necessarily don't have the experience, but I find people who do, and then we get that to you. Where to go if you want help? So in each province, and I'm not sure about the territories, but there are Aboriginal capital corporations that have grants and funding. They also have tons of resources. So like you mentioned, if you're going to mainstream business school, you have to take all these tax courses, and none of them have anything to do with First Nations. So you really have to go seek it out. So TAC is the one in British Columbia. That's where I live. And they provide grants, training, and access to support materials. They have business plan templates and links to other funding available. And again, reach out to other Indigenous people on LinkedIn. And then that is me. So if there's any other questions, I will turn it back to Adam.
Oh, thank you, Vickie. Thanks for the info on the phone, taking snapshots of documents, because I have to keep track of all of monies that I make on reservation for events that I do.
Right.
And every year, my business manager always says, where did you work? What did you make? And when was this? And I'm like, oh my God. So I got to go through everything. And, you know, so it's going to help out a lot. Man, the details you have, it's amazing, you know? So I'm going to have to look at it. And I think I might get one of my cousins to manage my, my cash flow, on res cash flow at home on my reservation, and it'll just make it all easier. And I just pay him a percentage, and you know, that will be just simplified, you know.
Yeah, it's a
So
lot better that way for sure.